Um, Now, somewhere around the early 1970s, the various trade organizations got together under the leadership of Clancy and George Cook, Mike O'Connor. There was also the folks from CFDA, Nargis, NAGA, and probably some others that I don't recall. And they concluded that it was absolutely crucial for the industry to come together to support a fact-based, extensive and detailed study to determine what should be done about checkout automation, if for no other reason they didn't want to have multiple solutions in the industry, which would require multiple inventories and just a nightmare of administration. If you recall back to the period when the country was struggling with what kind of color television or what kind of VHS versus beta tape should be used, it was, by the way, RCA who basically established the color television standard without asking anyone. They just simply did it, and it became the standard. So there was some historic reasons why the industry wanted to have a study before someone else, in effect, created a standard. Now, in about August, somewhere July or August of 1970, the industry reps formed, maybe it wasn't August, could have been a little earlier. They got together and they picked about 12 CEOs from the grocery industry, both retailers, distributors, and manufacturers, plus a gentleman from the pharmaceutical industry, Gavin McBain, I believe his name was. And they said, look, folks, we want you to form up a committee that would resolve this issue. Help us get the productivity, but help us do it objectively. And we, the trade organizations, will fund that effort. At that point, they walked out of the meeting. And the ad hoc committee then had to select a chairman, which they did. They selected Bert Gucken from Heinz, who was then effectively CEO of Heinz, and the rest is history, which we're going to cover a little bit. They solicited proposals from a number of companies, Arthur Andersen, McKinsey, and several others, and we were selected to deal with the iceberg somewhere around August of 1970. And then I was conscripted to be the project manager and began work late August of 1970. At that point, we had 3 or 4 folks on the team, and we had to now understand the nature of the problem. So we started by interviewing people who had previously selected standards, scanning standards that worked. I would bring to your attention OCR, A and B, the MICR code, MICR, that was used for checks and check sorting, which is used even today. And another one that most people don't remember, and that was the color bar codes that were on the railroad cars for decades, which turned out not to be very useful because, guess what? The color bars got dirty and the scanners didn't work so well. So we learned a lot from the successes and the failures of prior scanning technologies. Then we had to figure out how we were going to go beyond that. And early on, we decided that we needed to interview people in the industry who understood productivity and limits. We needed to interview equipment companies who might have a solution and might not. And we laid, in effect, in those first few months, we laid out the structure for how we would proceed. This was before there were any committees except for the ad hoc committee, who were effectively our client. So here we were, we went 1970, and then by the time we got to 1973, the code was selected, the symbol was selected, and we were in the throes of implementing the entire concept. Now we are here in 2012. The success is beyond all expectations. There's near universal implementation at most retail checkouts across most retail businesses. The error rate is hardly measurable. Over 1 trillion packages a year are scanned. Code management company that gave out the code numbers is awash in money. They're funding research into the next generation of scanning. There's a proliferation of products and departments. There's automated reorder. There's effective use of data beyond our wildest expectations, and the savings have all effectively been passed on to consumers. So how did it succeed? What were the fundamentals for success? I have probably too long a list, but let me start out by saying, first and foremost, it was the unselfish contribution of the ad hoc committee and later committee members who were looking out for the industry and not necessarily looking out for their own best interest. There were the 6 trade groups and others, so there was a relatively small group of people that turned out to be hundreds and hundreds of people that got involved over the next several decades. There was a willingness to compromise by virtually everyone who became involved and everyone who was affected. The technology was available, the economic environment was there, and the consumer preference for diversity was also supporting the need for some type of automation. There was also, luckily, an extraordinarily powerful symbol that finally, when I say symbol, it's more than just lines, it's the encodation, it's the error checking, it's the totality of how the symbol represents the code number. But we were very fortunate that there was an extraordinarily powerful symbol that was ultimately available for selection. And there was also then the truly gifted members of the ad hoc committee, the symbol committee, the code committee, who contributed mightily to the success. There was also, and I underscore this, a fair and balanced fact-based analysis that basically underpinned the rationale for the decisions that were to be made. There was adequate funding and also relatively tight timing. There was a lack of government involvement. We weren't slowed down by the bureaucracy, and there was a legal structure that kept us from violating the antitrust laws and any of the other regulations. Those are the things, in my opinion, that form the fundamental underpinnings for what was an extraordinarily successful standardization effort.